Napoleon Bonaparte stood proudly in the middle of a vast field, his hunting rifle slung casually over his shoulder. The weather was perfect, a clear blue sky stretched endlessly above, and the chirping of birds filled the air. He had been looking forward to this day, a brief respite from the pressures of ruling an empire. But what he didn't know was that this hunting trip would become one of the most bizarre chapters in his legendary life. "Let the hunt begin," Napoleon declared with a flourish, his officers cheering around him. The organizer, eager to please the emperor, had arranged for a truly spectacular hunt. Over 3,000 rabbits had been gathered and caged, ready to be released into the open field. The moment arrived. The attendants flung open the cages and the rabbits poured out. At first, everything seemed normal. The emperor raised his rifle, his sharp eyes scanning the field for a target. But something was off. The rabbits weren't scattering like they should. Instead of fleeing into the wilderness, they paused, then, as if on cue, turned to face Napoleon. "What is this?" he barked, his voice tinged with confusion. One rabbit hopped forward, then another, and another. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, the entire horde surged toward him in unison. "Mon Dieu! They're attacking!" Napoleon shouted, his voice rising in panic. The officers froze, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. It was almost comical, thousands of soft, fluffy creatures charging toward the most powerful man in Europe. But the humor quickly evaporated as the bunnies closed in. Napoleon's confusion turned to alarm as the first wave of rabbits reached him, clawing at his boots and hopping onto his coat. "Do something, you fools! Save your emperor!" he bellowed, swatting at the furry assailants. But the rabbits were relentless. It was as if they had been possessed by a single-minded determination. The emperor tried to retreat, but the sheer number of rabbits overwhelmed him. They swarmed his legs, hopping onto his lapels and nibbling at his gloves. Napoleon spun around, attempting to flee, but the bunnies were everywhere. The field was a chaotic sea of fur and twitching noses. "Why aren't they running away?" an officer yelled, trying to shoo the creatures with his hat. "Because they were fed," another shouted back. "They think we have food for them." Napoleon's face turned red as he clambered into a nearby carriage. "Retreat! Retreat at once!" he roared, the imperial dignity he had spent years cultivating, now buried under an avalanche of rabbits. The coachman cracked his whip in a frenzy, urging the horses to bolt. The carriage lurched forward, but the rabbits weren't giving up. They hopped after the retreating emperor with a determination that defied all logic. Officers scrambled to keep up, slipping and tripping over the wriggling mass of fur. "They're chasing us. Are they mad?" Napoleon cried, half hanging out of the carriage window to look at the approaching swarm. His polished boots, now scuffed and smeared with dirt, bore tiny bite marks where the rabbits had tried to nibble. One of his generals, still flailing at the rabbits with his saber, stumbled into the carriage, his wig askew. "Sire, these creatures, they must think we've got food on us. They won't stop until..." "Then give them food," Napoleon snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. "Empty the provisions. Throw them everything." The officers, desperate to follow orders, began hurling baguettes, apples, and whatever else they could find onto the field. For a moment, it seemed to work. The rabbits paused, nibbling eagerly at the scattered food. But then, the most horrifying realization dawned. "There are too many," an officer stammered, pointing a trembling hand toward the field. It wasn't just a few rabbits anymore, it was an endless wave of them, pouring out from behind bushes and hills. Every rabbit in the area must have heard the commotion and come running. Napoleon gaped in disbelief. "Where are they all coming from?" he roared, slapping the side of the carriage in exasperation. The carriage picked up speed, the horses neighing wildly as they galloped across the field. But even at full speed, the rabbits were gaining ground. Some of them had figured out how to hop onto the back of the carriage, their little paws scrabbling at the wooden frame. Napoleon grabbed his hat and threw it at them in a fit of desperation. "Take it, you cursed beasts! Take my hat if you must, but leave me be." The officers, not wanting to look cowardly in front of their emperor, began forming a defensive line behind the carriage. Swords flashed, and jackets flapped in the wind as they tried to hold off the relentless onslaught. But no matter how many rabbits they shooed away, there were always more. As the carriage thundered down the field, the swarm of rabbits pressed on relentlessly, their sheer numbers defying belief. The scene had devolved into utter chaos when, out of nowhere, a loud voice boomed over the pandemonium. "Hold your ground, men! Reinforcements are here. Everyone turned toward the hilltop, where a figure appeared silhouetted against the sun. It was none other than Captain Durand, the eccentric officer known for his unorthodox tactics and even stranger personality. His grand arrival was made even more absurd by his mount, a massive goat named Hercules, which bleated dramatically as they galloped toward the chaos. Napoleon squinted, his jaw slack with disbelief. "Is that a goat?" he muttered, but there was no time for further commentary. Durand raised his saber, the sunlight gleaming off its polished blade. "Stand aside, Your Majesty. I've faced worse than this during the Great Marmot Uprising of '03, he declared, his mustache quivering with intensity. "What Marmot Uprising?" Napoleon shouted, but Durand had already charged headlong into the rabbit horde. Hercules the goat leapt with surprising agility, scattering bunnies left and right. Durand cackled as he swung his saber dramatically, not at the rabbits, but at the air, as if he were performing for an invisible audience. Amid the madness, another unexpected figure emerged from the woods nearby. She was dressed in a long coat patched with various animal prints, a net slung over her shoulder, and a hawk perched on her arm. "Who called for a professional?" she asked, her voice calm yet commanding. Napoleon's eyes widened. "And who are you supposed to be?" "I'm Juliette Lafleur," she replied nonchalantly, tossing her auburn braid over her shoulder. "Animal wrangler extraordinaire. You're lucky I was passing through." The hawk on her arm let out a piercing screech, and with a swift motion, Juliette released it into the air. The bird swooped low over the rabbits, startling them into scattering briefly. But instead of retreating, the rabbits regrouped with renewed energy, their beady eyes fixed on Napoleon once more. Juliette frowned. These rabbits are unusually persistent. What did you do to upset them?" "I did nothing," Napoleon bellowed, pulling at his disheveled cravat. "It's this blasted organizer's fault. They were tamed and think we're their blasted lunch." Durand, still atop Hercules, paused mid-swing to shout, "What a glorious miscalculation! A tale for the ages!" Before diving back into the fray, as if the scene couldn't get more absurd, a low rumble began to shake the ground. At first, everyone assumed it was another wave of rabbits, but then, through the trees, came a tall, lanky figure driving a rickety wooden cart. His long coat flapped in the wind, and his wild white hair seemed to have a life of its own. Make way for Dr. Thaddeus Blott," the man shouted, his cart creaking under the weight of peculiar, bubbling contraptions. "I've brought my patented rabbit-repellent elixir, guaranteed to work or your money back." Napoleon's eye twitched. "You're joking." "Do I look like a man who jokes?" Thaddeus shot back, pulling a large, steaming cauldron from the cart. With a dramatic flourish, he poured a glowing green liquid into a series of glass vials and began hurling them into the crowd of rabbits. For a moment, it seemed as though the concoction was working. The rabbits stopped, sniffing the air cautiously. But then, to everyone's horror, they began hopping even faster, their energy levels apparently doubled by the strange brew. Thaddeus blinked. "Oh, I may have miscalculated." Napoleon buried his face in his hands. "I am surrounded by fools." As the chaos continued to spiral, Napoleon's carriage rattled on, the swarm of rabbits now joined by Durand on his goat, Juliette shouting orders to her hawk, and Dr. Blott scrambling to tweak his potions on the fly. Officers tripped over themselves trying to assist, and Napoleon could only watch helplessly as his once dignified hunting trip became a carnival of absurdity. But then, out of the corner of his eye, Napoleon spotted something or someone approaching from the far side of the field. A lone figure in a black cloak moved with purpose, their steps unnervingly calm amid the chaos. Slung across their back was a peculiar weapon, a crossbow with glowing blue bolts. "Who's that now?" Napoleon muttered, his voice tinged with both curiosity and exhaustion. The figure stopped, raised their crossbow, and without a word, fired a bolt directly into the heart of the rabbit swarm. The bolt exploded into a brilliant flash of light, and for the first time, the rabbits hesitated, their collective energy faltering. Napoleon's jaw dropped. Finally, someone who knows what they're doing. The figure lowered their hood, revealing piercing green eyes and a scar across their cheek. "I'm Isabelle Noir," they said simply, "and I'm here to clean up this mess." The battle was far from over, but with Isabelle's arrival, the tide of chaos might finally begin to turn. Isabelle Noir's calm demeanor and the effectiveness of her first strike immediately shifted the energy of the scene. The rabbits, who had seemed nearly unstoppable, paused long enough for the officers to regroup around the carriage. Napoleon, now leaning dangerously out of the window, barked orders at his men. "Rally yourselves, you imbeciles! Stand behind her!" he shouted, pointing at Isabelle. "Apparently, she's the only one here who doesn't belong in an asylum." Durand, still atop Hercules, gave an offended huff. "Speak for yourself, sire. My goat and I have been instrumental in this campaign." Ignoring him, Isabelle strode confidently toward the seething mass of rabbits, her crossbow loaded with another glowing blue bolt. "These creatures aren't normal," she said over her shoulder to Juliet, who was now holding her hawk protectively. "Something's driving them, something unnatural." Juliet frowned, her animal wrangler instincts kicking in. "Unnatural? You mean this isn't just a case of overfeeding?" Before Isabelle could respond, Dr. Blot came stumbling forward, waving a test tube filled with swirling pink liquid. "Aha, that explains everything. These rabbits must be under the influence of a foreign energy source, perhaps some mystical pheromone or even..." His voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. "Dark magic!" Napoleon groaned, his patience wearing thin. "Dark magic! Now I've heard everything." But Isabelle wasn't laughing. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the horde of rabbits, which had begun to regroup and surge forward again. "It's possible," she muttered, her tone serious. She fired another bolt into the swarm, and the brilliant light scattered the front line, buying them a few more precious seconds. "Something is amplifying their aggression. These bolts disrupt it temporarily, but we need to find the source." Napoleon stepped out of the carriage at last, brushing rabbit fur off his tattered coat. "Fine. If you think there's some mystical nonsense at play, find it. Meanwhile, I'll..." Before he could finish, the ground beneath them rumbled ominously. The rabbits began parting, almost as if they were making way for something or someone. Out of the rabbit swarm stepped a figure unlike anything the group had expected. It was a man dressed in a flamboyant green suit, complete with a top hat and a cane shaped like a carrot. His face was pale, and his eyes glittered with a strange, mischievous light. "Ah, so the great Napoleon Bonaparte has finally noticed my little army," the man said, his voice smooth and theatrical. He twirled the carrot cane and gave an exaggerated bow. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Monsieur Lapin, the true master of these lands." Napoleon blinked, utterly baffled. "Monsieur Lapin? The true master?" "Yes," Lapin said, straightening his hat. "And these," he gestured to the thousands of rabbits surrounding him, "are my loyal subjects. You dare intrude on my domain with your ridiculous hunting." "Precisely," Lapin said with a toothy grin, "though king feels so limiting. Let's go with conqueror." Isabelle, unfazed by Lapin's theatrics, stepped forward, her crossbow still at the ready. "Enough games. What have you done to these rabbits?" Lapin chuckled, twirling his cane. "Why, I've merely liberated them, given them the power to rise against their oppressors, against tyrants like you." He pointed the cane dramatically at Napoleon, whose face was turning an alarming shade of red. "Tyrant? I am the Emperor of Europe." Napoleon sputtered. "You're just a lunatic in a hat." Lapin wagged a finger. "Ah, but my rabbits don't think so, do they? They see me as their savior, the one who will lead them to victory against humanity's reign of terror." As if on cue, the rabbits began to hop in unison, creating a rhythmic thumping that sent chills down everyone's spine. The sound echoed across the field, a drumbeat of impending doom. Juliet stepped closer to Isabelle, her hawk squawking nervously. "This is bad," she murmured. "If he's controlling them somehow, we're going to need more than crossbow bolts to stop him." Dr. Blot, who had been furiously scribbling notes in a small journal, suddenly snapped his fingers. "Aha! I've got it. If he's using some sort of frequency to control the rabbits, we might be able to disrupt it with..." "Enough chatter," Napoleon barked, drawing his sword. "I don't care how you stop him, just do it. My dignity is at stake." Lapin smirked, tapping his cane on the ground. "Oh, it's far too late for dignity, my dear Emperor. Soon, the world will know the power of Monsieur Lapin and his unstoppable bunny brigade." As the rabbits surged forward once more, Isabelle loaded another glowing bolt into her crossbow, her jaw set in determination. "If you want to stop him," she said to the others, "you'll have to trust me. We're going to need to lure him out, force him to face us directly. And whatever happens, don't let him escape." The battle was far from over, and as Lapin's sinister laughter echoed across the field, the group prepared for what would surely be the strangest and most critical fight of their lives. The rhythmic thumping of the rabbits' coordinated hops grew louder, a heartbeat of chaos swelling across the field. Napoleon stood frozen, his sword trembling in his hand, as Monsieur Lapin twirled his carrot-shaped cane with unnerving confidence. But just when the situation seemed hopeless, a booming voice called out from the woods. Did someone say unstoppable? Ha! Let's see how unstoppable they are against me, the Iron Butcher. Everyone turned toward the sound, where a colossal figure emerged from the shadows. The man, if you could call him that, was encased in a patchwork of steel armor and spinning gears, his mechanical arms ending in serrated blades. He was trailed by a small army of clockwork hounds, their glowing red eyes scanning the scene. His voice echoed through a voice box embedded in his chest, giving it a metallic, distorted quality. Napoleon's jaw dropped. What fresh madness is this? The Iron Butcher stomped into the field, his hounds growling as they flanked him. I've heard tales of your rabbit army, Lapin, he boomed, pointing one of his bladed arms at the Rabbit King. I've come to test their mettle against my machines. Lapin's grin faltered slightly. And who, pray tell, are you supposed to be? I'm a visionary, the Iron Butcher declared, gears whirring as he spread his arms. The greatest inventor of this age, and I've decided to make you my next experiment. With that, he raised one arm, and his clockwork hounds leapt forward, their metal legs clanking as they charged into the sea of rabbits. The rabbits, however, weren't backing down. They swarmed the mechanical beasts, their sharp teeth and claws tearing at the metal with alarming efficiency. Sparks flew as the hounds tried to shake them off, but the rabbits' sheer numbers began to overwhelm even the Iron Butcher's creations. Napoleon groaned and slapped his forehead. Why do I keep attracting lunatics? Is this some kind of cosmic punishment? Meanwhile, Isabelle remained focused, her eyes narrowing as she watched the battle. We can use this distraction, she said to Juliet and Dr. Blot. If the rabbits are busy with the machines, we have a chance to get closer to Lapin and figure out how he's controlling them. Juliet nodded, her hawk taking off into the sky once more. I'll scout ahead, she said. If Lapin has some kind of device or artifact, we need to know where it is. As the group began to move, another voice cut through the chaos, this one soft, melodic, and hauntingly beautiful. A figure stepped out from the reeds lining a nearby pond, dressed in flowing blue robes that shimmered like water. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back, and in her hands, she held a harp carved from driftwood. Enough violence, she said, her voice echoing like ripples on a still lake. Let the waters calm this storm. Napoleon turned to Isabelle. Who is this now? Do I have a sign on my back inviting lunatics to join us? The woman ignored him, her fingers gliding across the harp strings. A soothing melody filled the air, and for a moment, the rabbits seemed to slow, their aggressive movements turning sluggish as if they were being lulled into a trance. Lapin's eyes narrowed. Ah, the Lady Ondine, he said with a sneer. You think your little lullaby can stop my army? How quaint! Ondine's expression remained serene. Your power is unnatural, Lapin. It disrupts the balance of nature. I will not allow it to continue. Lapin laughed, spinning his cane. Oh, please. Your watery tricks may work on beasts, but my rabbits are more than that. They are the embodiment of my will. He tapped his cane on the ground, and a sharp, discordant sound erupted, shattering Ondine's melody. The rabbits snapped out of their trance, their aggression returning with renewed vigor. Fine, Ondine said, her serene demeanor replaced by fiery determination. If it's a fight you want, it's a fight you'll get. She raised her harp, and streams of water shot out from the pond, forming shimmering serpents that coiled around her. With a flick of her wrist, the water serpents lunged at the rabbits, sweeping through their ranks and scattering them like leaves in a storm. Napoleon, now thoroughly exasperated, threw his hands in the air. Why is this happening to me? He's our best shot, Isabelle replied. Let's move. As Durin prepared for his reckless charge, the Iron Butcher's hounds continued their desperate battle against the rabbits. Ondine's water serpents wove through the chaos, and,